The Kena Upanishad describes how the gods, the psychological powers within us, are transformed by the recognition that their power is power of the divine, the Brahman. That transformation does not take place instantly. There are a series of flashes in which, bit by bit, the powers within us, our mind, our life energies, our senses, gradually learn to be accustomed to the contact with the divine influence, with the action of the light, power and joy that flow into them from their source in the Brahman. This period of accustoming involves a becoming passive to the touch of the divine, first by becoming silent, and then by turning, aspiring and yearning only for that and the touch of that. The repetitive touch and visitation from the beyond fixes the gods in their upward gaze and expectation. Constant repetition fixes them in a constant passivity. The result, though, is double. The silence in the inner consciousness within us, in our powers, becomes the foundation, and in that silence there is the knowledge of the silence of the Brahman. At the same time, in their functioning, in the functioning of our senses, in the mind, in the life energies, in the speech and action, there is the inspiration that fills and flows, and the response of their functioning to a supernal light, power and joy becomes in them the knowledge of the external activity, which is Brahman. So something very interesting is there. Within our own consciousness, there is a double status. Deep within, as a backdrop within us, is the silence, which is part of the silence of the Brahman. On the surface is the action driven by an inspiration, which is part of the action of Brahman. Suggesting, just as the Brahman has two aspects, the silent, passive, and the active and dynamic, so too within us we have a double aspect. There is the poise of the consciousness that stands observing, supporting, and there is the power of the consciousness moving, expressing. And this double status within us is in a sense a miniature recreation of the double status of Brahman, except that this recreation has emerged from an evolutionary process. It thinks and knows itself as a piece that has formed and developed from below, when actually it is a part, reflection, and even essentially a specialized representation in a narrow form of the Brahman's double status. And so as it grows, as it awakens to the source, it opens out, and this double status within us joins with the double status within the Brahman. It is an experience which is sometimes spontaneously had in the unfolding of the yoga, sometimes separately and sometimes in a double consciousness. Separately, it may appear as if when you lean within your consciousness to rest inside, in the silence within is felt to be vast and eventually one with the silence of the whole cosmos and the Brahman. Or, in the outer action, as we watch from a poise of an observing, witness consciousness, we watch our own actions and we realize our action is never separate from the action of the universe. Everything that's happening within us flows from outside, flows through, and flows out. Our life energies are flowing from outside. Our mind and thoughts also are coming in from outside and act. And from this poise of the witness consciousness, we realize actually what we called our activity was never really separate. It was always part of a universal activity. We had only an illusion of separateness. But these are two experiences which can happen separately. But when they join, there is this very interesting experience where your inner silence of the witness poise of consciousness is one with the silence of the Brahman, the self. Your separate witness, which could have been a poise of the mind or some inner poise, loses itself, its separateness in the self. And at the same time, the movement of the activity of life, mind, energies is seen to be part of the whole, which is the action of the Brahman, of the dynamic aspect of the self. And there is only self in its double aspect. I, this what was a little person, is at the point of that passive, active play, expressed and taking place through a special focus. Naturally, in such a consciousness, where is the sense of I? It thins out rapidly. The I of the awareness loses itself in the silence of the self. The I of the action and the personal will loses itself in the working of a larger universal will. And in this, he says, mind will know nothing but the Brahman, think nothing but the Brahman. The life will move to embrace, enjoy nothing but the Brahman. The eye will see, the ear will hear, the other senses sense nothing but the Brahman. In such a poise, obviously, everything is seen to be either silence or movement of Brahman. What happens then? In this emergence, in the play, movement or silence of Brahman, are you even aware of the other things and forms through which the Brahman is working? Or is it simply Brahman which blots out all sense of separateness? And so he asks this in the next question, in the next paragraph. But is then a complete oblivion of the external the goal? Must the mind and senses recede inward and fall into an unending trance? And the life be forever stilled? So in such a consciousness, it is as if even with eyes open, what are you seeing? Only Brahman and movement of Brahman. But can you engage with things? If you have to, for example, work with flowers, plants, stones, objects, would you be able to distinguish them, or will you simply see the one Brahman with ripples perhaps, but still overwhelmed by the scene of the oneness, and remain in some kind of an inward trance, but even with eyes open, still it is a trance only of Brahman? And the movements and possibilities of life then become still. Is this what is intended? The fact that he asks is obviously to prepare for a ground that says no. But first, he points out, yes, it is possible as an option. This is possible if the soul so wills. But it is not inevitable and indispensable. So first of all, the soul has a choice. The soul may choose to remain in this immersion of the oneness of Brahman, while in life continue with the awareness also of the movement of the Brahman, and then withdrawing from the light, choose to even merge into the silence of the Brahman. Or the soul may choose also to take up a different poise in this experience of the Brahman, in which it can engage with forms without losing this poise. And is this even possible? So Sri Aurobindo first of all affirms that it is not inevitable that you have to enter into this inward trance and lose all ability to function in the multiplicity. Nor is it indispensable to retain that poise. So there are traditions which say simply that you cannot help it. As you merge into Brahman, this is what will happen. It's inevitable. So Sri Aurobindo says, no, it's not inevitable. There are traditions which say it is indispensable for you to be in this silence within if you are to experience the Brahman. Otherwise, you get out of the silence and you are in life, but then you don't have the experience of the Brahman. And so they say it is indispensable for the experience to be like this. And again, Sri Aurobindo says, no, it is not indispensable. Not inevitable, not indispensable. Why? And now he has to justify, of course. And this justification, when we read Sri Aurobindo's explanation, it seems so obvious, so simple, and also so beautiful and fulfilling to our deeper aspiration. He says, the mind is cosmic, one in all the universe, but mind with a capital M. So too are the life, capital L, and the sense, capital S. So too is matter, capital M, of the body. And when they exist in and for the Brahman only, they will not only know this, but will sense, feel and live in that universal unity. So first he points out that in fact our mind is not a little piece cut out. It is part of a larger mind which is universal. So too our life, which is part of a larger universal life, and our senses and the material of our body. Now we have dwelt on this idea many times before, but briefly with a few key examples we recover the understanding of this. Notice your body, although it walks around, unlike the plants which are rooted in the ground, the body still needs to eat, take in material and throw out material to survive. In the plant it's obvious because they're rooted in the ground that they're dependent on the soil. And they're not separate from the soil. Take them out from the soil and they will die. They are part of the soil. It's as if the earth has become plant. But because we are moving around, we don't see that connection so obviously. But in the fact of our continuous need to absorb and exchange, both in food, water and air and other energies, it shows that we are actually part of a continuity of the material. Our body is part of the continuity of the material around us. In practice, if you throw poison into the environment, well, it just comes back into your body, is a part of your body. By a kind of an extension in time, we notice everything that's out there eventually gets in here, and everything that's in here eventually merges into what's out there, and we are never really separate. The separation is only a sense of a temporary appearance of the physical body. So our body, the matter of our body is part of a universal matter, so too the life. As we are breathing in, we are expelling life energy, taking in and expelling. The environment being disturbed, we absorb the disturbance which makes us disturbed. Or if we are disturbed internally and we expel it, it spreads the disturbance in the environment which is picked up by others. And so in the energy itself, there is a continual flow in which our personal energy is not separate from the energy outside. If we were to see with clairvoyant sight, we would see the energy being drawn in the subtle body and then flowing out in the subtle body, and a continuous process of exchange, keeping a precarious balance. If at any point you take in too much, you get destabilized. If you expel too much, you get depleted. And so you have a kind of a rhythm, taking in, expelling, taking in, expelling. As our breathing, physical breathing only replicates that rhythm. to keep a kind of a balance. And the moment we are depleted in energy, we draw much more intensely. And the same of the mind. And we have seen this before. Our mind is part of a larger mind in which the thoughts flow, enter our mind or even pass through. Thoughts that we may rarely create. Most of our thoughts are coming in from outside. The few thoughts that we consciously create go out and spread into the environment. And it's not difficult to verify this. If you sit with a group of people sitting quietly and you create a clear, distinct thought which is formed, people around can catch that. This kind of a transmission can be even experimented and played upon and is easy to do. In fact, there are many unconsciously are imprinting their thoughts and energies into the environment in order to change the environment. Any powerful leader, political or business or other kind of leader, is constantly throwing out energies into the masses in order to influence the masses and sway them. The word we use, charisma, is really this phenomenon where somebody is able to project an energy which somehow attracts people or causes a certain response. And this is possible because there is a continuity of the mental consciousness. And of the senses also there is a continuity in a universal sense. And we have seen this example, I believe perhaps last time or with the time before, that we see color the same across different biological bodies because the perception of color is in fact taking place in the mind, which is universal. From this perspective, we may even say that when you look at the tree appears tree to all of us because our minds share in the universal mind which chooses to see tree as tree. The universal mind chooses to see self in that aspect and form of the tree experience, and therefore what it sees reflects in our consciousness as the perception of the tree, within which there are variations and limitations depending on the functioning of our mind and our physical senses. If you put colored tinted glasses, then the tree color will appear different. You can distort the image, but the sense of tree is still tree. The form can be played with in its appearance, but the essential sense of tree is still the same as the universal mind chooses to see self, or the self chooses to see itself through the universal mind. So this being the reality, we are not conscious of it. We are conscious only of this limited perception we have. But he says, when these powers within us, when they exist in Brahman and for Brahman only, they will not only know this, but sense, feel and live in that universal unity. This now becomes obvious. When you are conscious and exist in the Brahman, you have the sense of being part of the whole, the oneness that is all. And when you live for the Brahman, that is all that happens, all that you do is only given and flowing to that one. Obviously, the perception turns to this completeness and to this universality. The sense of oneself is universal, but the sense of the action and the expression is also in the universal. From the universal, flowing into the universal. And therefore, automatically, the powers within us, mind, life, senses, know this fact of their universality and sense, feel and live in that universal unity. Because that's all there is. What else is there? When you are dwelling on the Brahman, Brahman is universal and therefore everything lives for, senses for and feels for and in this universality. So this is a critical component of the transition, that the more we grow in the awareness of the Brahman and the more we grow in the life dedicated to the Brahman, the more there is this widening of the sense of universality spontaneously. In a sense, it's the condition. When they exist in and for Brahman only, they will not only know this, but sense, feel and live in that universal unity. And the condition is when they exist and live for the Brahman only. You will see in any process of yoga, in the beginning there is a first point of contact with the divine. One begins to receive, one begins to give, whatever form it may take, in action, in the karma yoga, in the heart's love, in the bhakti yoga, in the mind's dwelling, in the jnana yoga, whichever form it is, one begins to perceive and then to give. And as this exchange grows, the perception of the Brahman grows, our consciousness flowing also widens, and naturally, inevitably, there is a widening as the yoga and the identification grows. The process can be gradual, but it is inevitable. And in its completeness, as one perceives and dwells upon the oneness of the Brahman and gives oneself to the oneness and living in the oneness, it takes its complete fulfillment in living, feeling and sensing in that universal unity. Therefore, what happens as a consequence? Therefore, to whatever thing they turn, which to the individual sense and mind and life seems now external to them, there also it is not the mere form of things which they will know, think of, sense, embrace and enjoy, but always and only the Brahman. So now, as you are dwelling within yourself, it is obvious you will be dwelling in the Brahman. But when the consciousness itself feels one with this vastness, the mind is aware of itself as a part of the universal mind and so on. As you look at things and sense things, where are they taking place? Earlier you thought they were outside you, but now in this universality they are inside you. So what earlier you dwelt on within you as the experience of Brahman now has widened to include everything in the world which now also is felt within you. So this is the nature of the transition. As the consciousness grows freer and wider, the sense of things being within you becomes more and more natural. Again, it can begin with fine degrees. At a very crude social level, you will find our ego widens to include our family. I'm willing to sacrifice my convenience for my family. I'm willing to sacrifice my life to protect my country, and so on. But it's still an ego, a larger ego, for which you are ready to give up your convenience, the smaller ego. But in this case, in the dissolution of the ego, the component which is similar, all this is my family, but it is not my family against the rest. It is only a widening, an immersion into the wideness. As this sense of things grows to be internal to us, the whole world and all that is in it also is felt within you. And so, therefore, whatever thing they turn, which to the individual sense, mind and life seems now external to them, there also they will think, sense, embrace, enjoy only and always the Brahman. But now he gives some finer aspects to this experience. There also it is not the mere form of things which they will know. So you will know the form of things because you're looking out through the physical senses or the mind's thought and emotions. You will still see that, but it will not be limited to that because you will see it within a consciousness that knows Brahman and embraces Brahman. And there is a continuum of the awareness from the form to its essence in Brahman. So, not the mere form of things which they will know, think of, sense, embrace, and enjoy. So these again represent a series. First, you know. It's not that immediately you see the Brahman, because in your consciousness you begin to perceive the sense of Brahman in all things. And so when you look at the flower, you feel, this also has the same presence. You know, but you don't really see with your physical senses. It's some part of the mental consciousness which knows. Subsequently, that begins to deepen, and from the knowing, it becomes dwelling in thought, thinking. I look at the flower and I remember the divine. And then that grows into the senses. I look at the flower and I see the joy and the smile of the divine. And then the fourth, as I look at the flower, it is as if my consciousness is embracing the divine in and through the flower. It is embracing the divine as flower. And then the relationship of the flower is an enjoyment not of the form of the flower only, but the form itself that I enjoy is a form of the divine in the way he chooses to reveal himself in the form, but it is the divine and the Brahman that I am enjoying in the flower. Now this aspect of enjoyment is critical, because after all, the whole universe burst out of the oneness of the divine as an expression of his delight. And the purpose of the play is for the play of the delight to be unveiled. At first the delight is concealed. You do not feel it. As you struggle to overcome, you are concentrating on the pain and discomfort of the struggle. But in the overcoming, you discover the joy. I did it. But if you observe closely, as you were struggling, there was within you a sense of fulfillment. I'm able to stand in spite of the difficulty. I'm able to move forward and make this progress. It's only the ego which distorts this truth of the delight, of the growth and in the struggle by making it a personal struggle and by fixating on the goal which you might or might not reach, in which case all my effort would be meaningless. When I've attained to the goal, the knot of the ego is momentarily released, or the distortion of the ego is momentarily released, and I look back and say, all my effort was worthwhile, it was so wonderful, it was so great, I'm not suffering anymore right now. If the knot of the ego is dissolved right at the beginning, every step of the journey is, here's another step, another delight, another discovery, another overcoming, and so on. And when the goal is reached, it is only another shade or color of the delight, perhaps more complete, more inclusive, but still leading to still other delights as you move along. Moreover, the external will cease. Therefore, to whatever thing they turn, which to the individual sense and mind and life seems now external to them, there also, it is not the mere form of things which they will know, think of, sense, embrace, enjoy, but always and only the Brahman. So these 5 steps are the degrees through which this immersion finds its greater and greater completeness. At any one of these 5 stages, one could stop and say, I have reached it. You can begin to perceive the sense of Brahman in the knowledge. Yes, everything is Brahman. And there are schools which say, this is it. You are now free. You can do what you like. But we will say there's still something missing. From that knowledge, one has to dwell on until it becomes a reality of the senses even. But the senses seeing is not enough. There has to be a deeper, more intimate contact and embracement of the consciousness, even in the gaze, even in the taking of the food, even in a relationship at a distance. An embracement is felt where the consciousness meets and enjoys a difference in relationship with Brahman. And finally, it is the enjoyment that finds the completion. And that's why we will see in the next verse of the Kena, the name of that is that delight. But we will come to that shortly. Moreover, Sri Aurobindo writes, the external will cease to exist for them because nothing will be external, but all things internal to us, even the whole world and all that is in it. So you can see as the consciousness begins to widen and become free, again it grows in degrees. At first your wideness blurs in its edges. The sense of personal boundary which was narrow has dissolved and there is a wideness. How wide is it? Doesn't matter. It fades out into the universe. But practically it may still be limited to an immediate space around you. And so the things which are in that environment of your thoughts or your physical senses, you look upon and you experience this contact and intimacy with the Brahman. Things which are far away, you may or may not feel as easily. As the gaze turns upon something, there will be the spontaneous sense of expansion and identification and embracement in that. So the individual life will lose its sense of separateness and live only in and as one life in which all individuals are simply whirls of the indivisible flood of pranic activity. So you will live not on this knot, of course you're aware of this knot, but you're aware of all knots in the oneness that is life, and life is indivisible. And it is in that indivisibility of oneness of life that you live, as in the mind everywhere you live. And so it will be in the next sentence, the very body and senses will be no longer conscious of a separated existence, but the real body which the man will feel himself to be physically will be the whole earth and the whole universe and the whole indivisible form of things wheresoever existent. And the senses also will be converted to this principle of sensation, so that even in what we call the external, the eye will see only Brahman only in every sight. The ear will hear Brahman only in every sound. The inner and outer body will feel Brahman only in every touch. And the touch itself as if internal in the greater body. Now all of this you can see, you get a sense of what it will be. But all the nuances, and there are rich nuances and multiple ideas here, we will explore next Sunday. But remember, all these powers have been described in this text as conscious powers, as gods, divine powers. So the result is, and we read the rest of the text simply for the completion of the idea, the soul, whose gods are thus converted to this supreme law and religion, will realize in the cosmos itself and in all its multiplicity the truth of the one, besides whom there is no other or second. Moreover, becoming one with the formless and infinite, it will exceed the universe itself and see all the worlds not as external, not even as commensurate with itself, but as if within it. So such will be the nature of that experience of the cosmic consciousness, which the full scope of these lines we will explore next Sunday. For now we can simply dwell on this idea of the result of the limits of the ego and the walls of individuality breaking and the opening to the oneness of universality.